try to keep an open mind about a lot of this. I know some of the stuff is like, what? Because I've tried explaining quite a few things in this slide to some of my family members, and they just get confused every time I try to talk to them about it. So I just ask you to keep an open mind about it and realize that like the terms and definitions I'm throwing at you are things that actual people do identify with. So whatever your beliefs, just try to take in some of the information if you can. Okay, so I'm going to be talking about gender and sexuality today. So technical definition of gender is completely a psychological identity. It's something constructed in your mind. It's completely different from your biological sex, because that's determined by your chromosomes. Your gender is not determined by any sort of genetic trait. It is completely psychological. It's something you create in your mind. So the typical boy and girl, yes, we match it up with our biological sex, but that doesn't mean that there aren't other options. And one way that I can describe this that would probably be easy for people to understand is it's like a spectrum. So think of like the colors, like a spectrum of colors. You've got like red on one side, purple on the other side, and one end is feminine, the other end is masculine, and then you can kind of like flow in between there. Like strictly feminine would be female, strictly masculine would be male, or boy and girl. So that might be the easy way to explain it. So our first one is cisgender, which is basically means that your sex and your identity, your gender identity, match up. Like, I assume that the majority of people in this room are cisgender, because if you have female parts, you identify as a girl, or if you have male parts, you identify as a boy. And for some of these slides, I try to match up some sort of celebrity that people would know. So, Nicki Minaj. Transgender is another one that's especially gotten a lot of attention in the media because of Caitlyn. And basically that's where your gender identity does not match up with your sex. And this isn't just like male to female or female to male. This can be used as like an umbrella term for people who just don't identify as boy and girl. But to keep things simple, just think of it male to female, female to male. Basically, a lot of misconceptions that I've seen anyway are that you aren't your identity until you've transitioned to it, you've made the sex change and everything, but that's not true, because, I mean, if someone came to you and said, and they had a female body and they said, hey, I'm a guy, would you continuously call them by a girl, or would you respect them and call them by a guy? It's like the same thing. If someone came to you and told them that they were gay, would you keep assuming they were straight until you actually saw them with another gay person? So, just to kind of put that into perspective. And it's not no longer in use. It was called gender identity disorder, because so many people were, coming up and saying, I'm having, dysphoria, which is where you get confused and you're kind of upset looking at your body. So they coined the term gender identity disorder to kind of explain why this is going on, but it's no longer in use. So yeah, and then that's Laverne Cox from Orange is the New Black. By gender, basically you identify as two genders. Typically this is both male and female at the same time. Someone that my dad went to high school with, he looked at her Facebook page and recently found out that she identified as bigender. So it's not just, some mythical thing like a unicorn. It actually is an identity, and it's not just appearing in young people, it's just is. I couldn't find a celebrity of this one, so you'll actually see some blank slides because not a lot of celebrities are LGBT or have a different gender. So, Ed, please.
That was right.
So third gender and non-binary, they kind of go hand in hand. Basically, it's anything that isn't boy or girl. And also, I'm just going to say some sexualities and some gender identities do have like pride flags. I'm wearing the asexual pride flag. And so that's just a visual, so you don't have to like remember that. But basically, it's just anything that isn't male or female. And India does have actually an option on a birth certificate, and I think Germany does too, where you have a third gender option, and basically it's just X, and then your child, when they're old enough, they can actually go in and change it to whichever one is desired. In India, it was made just specifically for the transgender community, so that way they would be seen as valid. So, agender is basically no gender identity. This one confuses a lot of people, because it's like, how can you not have that? I don't know, but they just lack a gender identity. Basically, you can see it as they don't put a label on themselves, even though there's a label for it. Gender fluid, maybe not the best example, but depending on your views, but Miley Cyrus has claimed to say that she is gender fluid. She also says she's pansexual, and I'll get to that later. But, yeah. Basically, their gender identity changes from day to day, I guess. One of my friends identifies as gender fluid, and basically, some days they are dressed in dresses, other days they're dressed in a really baggy hoodie and pants. And that one, a lot of people think is confusing, because it's like, why can't you just stick to one? But I try to keep an open mind about it and just kind of accept it for what it is. And, yeah. Demigender is also another kind of confusing one. You identify as usually two genders, we identify more strongly with another one. So going back to gender fluid, if they're identify as male and female switching on either day, if they primarily, like, let's say they go like a month as a girl, but then one day they switch to being a boy, and then they go straight back to being a girl. And best way I can explain that. That's kind of what demigender is. So the top ones for the top flag is for demi-boy, middle one's for demi-girl, and the last one's for demi-non-binary, for basically any other gender that isn't male and female. And these are just some other things that probably should have been put as the last slide. I messed that up, okay. We'll just get to it now. So polyamory is when you're in a relationship with more than one person, but it's all like mutual. Basically, it's a romantic threesome. You could, all three of you, like, together, love each other equally. And then sexuality and gender are fluid. They can change throughout your life. It isn't just one thing that you have to decide on. Like, I don't know, I guess when I was younger, I would be considered straight, because I, did have crushes on guys and stuff. But, then I'm like, well, I'm asexual because I don't experience that. So it does change. And no matter why it changed or not, whether, it was because of a bad experience or just enlightenment, it's still valid. So, now I'm going to talk about sexuality. And your sexuality is your sexual attraction. There is also romantic attraction, and those two are completely different. And you can have a romantic attraction that's different from your sexual attraction, but that just makes things more confusing, so we're just going to ignore romantic attraction. So again, think of it like a spectrum. You've got one side over here, and then there's like a mix of things over here, and you've got another side over here. So like, this side is you're straight, this side's gay, and then you've got a whole bunch of mess in between. And then this is where the LGBTQA, that's their full acronym, comes into play. And one thing I do want to point out is a lot of misconceptions that the A stands for ally at the end of it, and it doesn't. It stands for asexual. That's just a little pet peeve of mine. But, and the CDC sent out like a poll in like 2014 asking people what they identified as. And obviously most, as you could probably expect, most people chose straight. But you also have people putting something else, or I don't know. So that just kind of shows you that there are other ones other than just gay and straight. Obviously, I will start out with heterosexual, which is straight, and it's your sexual attraction to a gender or sex, usually sex opposite of yours. And again, I do assume that most people in this room are straight. Our example today is Obama. And then we have gay and lesbian. So their sexual attraction is to the same gender/sex as their own. Common ones are Ellen DeGeneres and Tyler Oakley. If you don't know who they are, I put in parentheses what they're known for. Then there's also bisexual, which is where you identify, you have sexual attraction to people who are either male or female, generally. So you have sexual attraction to two. This one's also actually pretty common, I would think. Based on the poll anyway, you have 1.6% of people. No, that one was, I'm getting confused. Moving on. So basically, yeah, it's usually male or female that somebody's attracted to, and then our example's pink. Pansexual is attraction to any and all genders. So when I talk about, you have all of those other gender options that most of you probably have never heard of, this is where pansexual usually comes into play because they have sexual attraction to basically all of them. An example is actually the very first pansexual legislator, Mary Gonzalez. I'm not sure if a lot of people have heard of her, but I know she was in the news, and that's why I thought of her. Polysexual is basically pansexual except for maybe excluding a few, but usually people just kind of lump them together. And then we have asexual. This is my slide. So this is no sexual attraction, and this is not the same as like celibacy, which is like a personal vow never to have sex or anything. Basically, you just don't develop crushes. You don't look at somebody and think, oh, wow, they're hot. It's just, that's just how it is. But someone who's asexual can still be like in a romantic relationship. This is where I go back to saying that there's romantic attraction and sexual attraction are completely two different things. And my example is, other than myself, the comedian Janine Garofalo. She was pretty popular in the 90s, but she's recently come back to her comedy tours and stuff. And then, to make things a little bit more confusing, so you know how we have that spectrum of straight to gay? Well, then there's also a second spectrum, which is the ace spectrum, asexual spectrum. And so basically, you have no sexual attraction to sexual attraction over here, and then you got more in between. So I'm just making this really complicated for everybody. And so basically it's where you rarely experience sexual attraction. It's basically the same as asexual. Usually people just say asexual. But I decided to throw it in there. Then we also have demisexual, which is also on the ace spectrum, whereas you only really experience sexual attraction after forming a really strong bond with somebody. So the best example that I can put, and this is what one of my friends who is demisexual told me, it's basically like you only get crushes on your friends. Like, only ever your friends. After, you've known them for years. So, granted, you might think, oh, hey, that's usually how, relationships work. You get to know somebody and then you get into a relationship with them. But, again, this is sexual attraction, not like romantic attraction. And that's basically it. I hope I didn't confuse everybody so much, and I hope I don't get burned at the stake.